Hello students. Serving the Lady and the Lord might seem at the beginning, if you haven't been present or have ever thought about Wicca in this way, a little strange, especially if you come from other main or traditional faiths or religions. Now you gotta understand that a lot of the representations that we have in Wicca come from nature. Almost every witch is a priestess or priest of the old religion. We serve the Lady and the Lord and those in our communities who come for us to help. Some of us call ourselves Wiccan clergy to emphasize to the outside world that we share the legal rights and responsibilities held by clergy of other faiths. Remember that legal responsibilities are different in each state and nation. Myself, for example, in addition to training, reading books, and research, I have got a couple of licenses for hand fasting and also training on the first degrees, which we'll talk in a little bit. I will expect that you have to prove that you're qualified before you can officiate at a wedding, for example. Most require you to notify authorities if you learn of child abuse or another crime while acting in your ministerial role. You will need to research local laws if you intend to act as clergy in a public role. Card-carrying witches. There are different organizations and paths in which witches would like to function as clergy in the wider society, and know that they will sometimes need credentials to be recognized. Say, for example, they want to perform a marriage or hand fasting, act as a hospital chaplain, or attend an interfaith conference. Organizations such as the Covenant of the Goddess and Aquarian Tabernacle Church are registered churches and tax-exempt organizations within the U.S. federal government and do issue clergy credentials. Efforts are underway in Canada and some European countries to get similar recognition from pagan clergy. This does not mean that a priestess of the craft has the same religious role as a Lutheran pastor or a Roman Catholic priest. We might teach as a rabbi does. We may offer comfort and spiritual support to a covenant, as a pastor does with hers or her flock. We often officiate our rites of passage, that we call them hand fastings and child blessings, rather than weddings and baptisms. But we don't hear confessions, offer absolution for sins, interpret Holy Scripture, or stand as official channels between humanity and the gods. Craft clergy are different in another way. We openly use magic in different forms for many positive purposes. Now Christians and others perform magic in very restricted ways, but usually only an ordained clergy person is allowed to. They call this transubstantiation, or turning wine into the blood of Jesus, or faith healing, or other things. But the list of approved magical practices and the occasions where they can be performed is very short, and they won't call it magic, and almost none of them will do divination. Another difference is that the ministerial roles of the mainstream faiths are few in number and carefully limited. Contrast the many possible roles of a witch. From bard to deathwalker to sacred clown, it becomes clear that we have many different ways of serving the goddess and the old gods by being priestesses and priests. What gods do we serve? Or God? Most witches serve both the feminine and masculine phases of deity. Some focus exclusively on the goddess, very few focus only on the god. We sometimes call them goddesses, or God, or Lady and Lord. Frequently, we refine these great polarities farther to more specific aspects like the moon goddess and the horn god. One of the favorite god forms in the craft, and very old, is the Green Man. He is a masculine divine energy as expressing the plant kingdom, especially the sprouting, growing, blossoming energy of the wilderness. He is often represented as a semi-human face, with leaves forming his head and beard, and even sprouting from his mouth. Many medieval cathedrals have the Green Man carved into stone and wooden decorations. One theory is that pagan artisans built and decorated these churches, and because they didn't know or care about Christian symbolism, they used the images of the old gods of nature. That the old pantheons of Northern and Western Europe are popular among witches, generally there's nothing to prevent one from working with any pantheon in the Wiccan context. That is, you can be a witch and work with the deities and mythology of ancient Egypt or classical Greece or early China or anywhere else. You may feel strongly drawn to a particular culture and era, like I do, for example, with the Norse or Celtic gods. Perhaps you have a past life connection with them, and you feel both fascination and familiarity. Just follow your heart. There are groups of witches called Dianic feminist groups, which only work with goddesses. Their need and their joy is to explore only the feminine side of the divine that has been neglected and the value for so long in Western patriarchal society. Let's talk about training, initiation, and degrees. Well, Wicca has long been a religion on initiates. That is, changing as more people want to be witches but don't feel the need for initiation. Others don't want to practice with others, except perhaps to attend a public ritual, for which you don't need initiation, you just need to show up. For many like myself, the practice of witchcraft is a private thing, and solitary is answer to no one but the goddess and the old gods about their initiation or degrees. However, as I said before, I think it's always good to do research before you try to be a witch or start down this path and get a foundation of formal training. This is ideal, and there are so many choices that can get you where that training might lead you. The traditional way, of course, is to join a training coven committed to passing on craft knowledge so their students can grow as witches and eventually form their own covens. A second option is to take online courses. These can provide good information, but they cannot replace experience-based participation in a group for learning things like raising and grounding power. Then a third alternative is to attend live workshops like those sponsored by metaphysical shops at festivals or, of course, at Ardentane. Here the teaching is face-to-face and the students gain experience of practicing in a group. Of course, classes at bookstores and festivals are on whatever subjects the teacher wants to teach, not necessarily what the student needs at the moment. So let's look at the curriculum or an idea of what a first-year craft dedicant or witch will have. In the first year, there are mostly 12 skills that a first year will have. The first skill is to learn how to achieve balance. The second is to learn about rituals and the format of a ritual. The third is to learn about meditation and trance. The fourth, about learning, of course, about the deities of all religion. Fifth, history and tradition. You need to know where everything comes from, right, to make sure that you understand. Ethics, spell casting, psychic skills, divination, ritual tools, Wicca in the modern world, and the Wheel of the Year and the S-Bats. As you can see, the list of subjects is only a sample. Each coven will teach in the order it feels is appropriate, and some material will be expanded or deleted. But I think that this is a good checklist at the end of the year and a day for you have to cover all these subjects, and then if you require more depth in the exploration before you can even call yourself a witch. Many traditions of witchcraft recognize one's progress by conferring initiatory degrees on their students. I attended one of these such schools, and I did the first part, the first year, a year and a day, and then I continued to take a couple more courses and stop for a little while before going into the second year and third year. My education as far as Wicca concerned started with almost a 3-year time frame, and that was really helpful. In the most traditional way, you begin by dedicating yourself to the study of the craft for a year and a day, and become known as a dedicant, candidate, a seeker, or simply a first-year student. After a year and a day, if you have finished all the classes and readings and have shown that you're ready, you may be initiated into the first degree and you can call yourself a witch. At this stage, you're considered priest or priestess to yourself. You know the ethics of witchcraft and some religious history, and you're familiar with the goddess and the old gods. You also might know some basic spellcraft and ritual, and are colliding rituals if you are in a coven. You understand the elements and basic correspondences, and you have a connection with nature, the greatest teacher of all. In addition to all this information, you probably are jotting down notes and all your research in your book of shadows. The sample requirements for a first degree initiation as a minimum are: you must have experienced initiation on a spiritual level. You must find the common beliefs, traditions, practices, and ethics of the craft compatible with yours. You have to have freely choose Wicca as your spiritual path. You must have been exploring actively the craft for at least a year and a day. You must have basic magical skills and knowledge of the craft terms. Always read the required books, several of the recommended ones. You must be willing to live by the Wiccan Ready. I think this is the most important one. And take an oath to honor and act in accord with the goddess and God within in daily life as well as in ritual. You have to know how to keep information confidential and to aid and defend your sisters and brothers of the craft. You must devise, and I think this is super important, a personal oath declaring your present spiritual and magical goals. If you're in a coven, you also will be working to develop and maintain strong, wise, and caring relationships with your coven sisters or brothers, and communicating their needs, expectations, and resources. If you are in a coven, obviously you are expected to participate in most coven activities and take fair share of responsibility for planning, organization, and leadership. You must create or obtain some basic tools and garb of the craft, like a robe and a theme, a chalice, wand, and pentacle. If you're going to do this on yourself, then you can go acquiring these items little by little, and remember that you have to make it your own. But if you're in a coven, you might be asked to acquire these earlier. And it's important that you choose a craft name, or like we were talking, a magical name, as a new stage of spiritual growth, and explain to the coven where and when it might be used. For the first degree in priests and priestesses, before we go into the witchcraft vocations, normally there are symbols associated with each one, and a water triangle or an equilateral triangle with a point down it means a first degree. A second degree has the pentagram point up, and in some European traditions also have the single point down, showing the horn god in face with the muzzle, the ears, and the horns. This is not to confuse it with some groups or cults that are not Wicca, and they're not witchcraft, and they're mostly representing satanic cults. And then the third degree is a pentagram with the point up, and above you have a fire triangle with one point up, and they're both joined together, and that's a third degree priest or high priestess. After the first year, you are going to get to know more about the old gods, and you will do some shadow work and be considered a priest or priestess to others. And at this stage, you can help newer students lead rituals and teach some subjects, assist with coven leadership, and perhaps as a maiden or summoner, which are high priestess in training. It all depends. The titles and duties will vary from one tradition to another. In the third year, witches will work with Hieros Gamos, or sacred marriage within, which is the balancing of male and female energies so they become fully actualized people, free of limiting stereotypes. This, I think, is the most difficult for a witch, and it was the most difficult for myself, and I'm still working on it, even though I have intellectualized the theory. But to try to be free of limiting stereotypes is extremely difficult, I think, in today's world. So that might be a challenge for you. Some people find it easy, other people have difficulty. They continue to lead rituals and perform magic and planning, and you learn about group dynamics and teaching techniques, and also you might be asked to do some pastoral counseling. When you are all this completed, you may be ready for leadership, and this leadership role might be in a community, in a group that runs the local festivals or public Sabbaths, and you can start your own coven. Some traditions have a 5-degree system, like in the UK, the Alexandrian witches, and in some systems, like in the UK, you have to have a genetic link to what is called the Alexandrian witches, which were the original descendants of Salem's witches. The next degree involves water issues like compassion, intuition, and silence, and is followed by a fire degree, in which you can work on issues of power, purpose, and will. And then finally, you will hone intuitions and skills such as intellect and imagination, and be granted the air degree. To obtain the last connection to deity, you attain the spirit degree. Some traditions have only 2 categories of membership, like non-initiates, like witches in training, and initiates. And all learning beyond the initial level is considered a deepening of one's practice, but it is not recognized by any formal degree. Now, let's look, just like, this kind of reminds me of karate, when students go through the different belts. In witchcraft and Wicca, we also have what is called the colors of the core. And it is common for witches to wear cords of different colors to mark the degree of initiation. Different covens and traditions have different color schemes, and our own tradition has white cords for dedicants, green for first degree initiates, red for second degree, and either silver for female or gold for male for the third degree initiates. Another tradition adds another color for each step up, and not necessarily in degrees, but for achievements, sort of like the Girl Scouts, and their cords are eventually a multicolor wonder. But when you meet someone in the craft for the first time, you may ask what the color signifies. In the next video, we're going to talk about witchcraft vocations, and also we're going to be talking about your decision to be in or out of the broom closet. I'll see you then.